This podcast is the design of City Sites Urban Media, and our goal is to bring into focus the difference between culture and God's ideas found in His Word. To learn more, go to citysitesurbanmedia.com.
It's right here in Greensboro. I've lived in Greensboro all my life. I didn't have time to write a fancy speech. I didn't have time to, I didn't have the resource of an English teacher to sit down and write a speech with at school today and, brought over here or practice or anything. What I really came down here for is this. I've heard a whole lot of people in here talking tonight about this group and that group and domestic violence and blacks, these minorities and that minority. What I want to know is, when are you all going to start standing up for the majority? And here's who the majority is. I'm the majority. I'm a law-abiding citizen who's never shot anybody, never committed a serious crime, never committed a felony. I've never done anything like that. But it seems like every time we have one of these shootings, nobody wants to put the blame where it goes, which is at the shooter's feet. You want to put it at my feet. You want to turn around and restrict my right, constitutional right that's spelled out in black and white. You want to restrict my right to buy a firearm and protect myself from some of the very people you're talking about in here tonight. It's ridiculous. I don't think Rod Serling could come up with a better script. It does not make any sense. The law-abiding citizens of this community and many communities around this country, we're the first ones taxed and the last ones considered and the first ones punished when things like this happens, because our rights are the ones that are being taken away. That's the reason why I came down here today. Gun show or no gun show, NRA or no NRA. I'm here to stand up for the law-abiding citizens of this community, because I'm going to tell you that what's going to happen. You can take the guns away from us all you want to. You all write a law, I follow the law, I'll bring my guns down here, I'll turn them in. But here's what's going to happen. The Crips and the Bloods on the other side of town, they're not going to turn their guns in. They're going to hold on to them. And what's going to happen when you have to send the police down there to go take them? The police can barely enforce the law as it is. As what I see, we demonize the police, criminalize and vilify the police, and we make the criminals into victims. And we're talking about restricting guns? How are you going to do that? How are you going to do that when the police department's already hamstrung? You're not going to be able to go down here and take these guns from these criminals. So the criminals are going to hold on to their guns. They're still going to have them. They're still going to break in my house, and they're still going to shoot me with them. And guess who's going to be the one that suffers? It's going to be me. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight, it is not going to happen without a fight. And when I say fight, I don't mean shots fired. I don't mean fists thrown. I mean I'm going to come down here to this city council and raise hell just like these loonies from the left do until you listen to the majority of the people in this city. And I am the majority. The majority of the people in this city are law-abiding, and they follow the law. And they want their constitutional right to be able to bear arms. They want to be able to go to the gun show and buy a hunting rifle or a sport rifle. There are no military-grade weapons sold at the gun show. An AR-15 is not a military-grade weapon. Anybody that would go into combat with an AR-15 is a fool. It's a semi-automatic .22 rifle. You'd be killed in 15 minutes in combat with that thing. So we need to dispel all these myths, and we need to drop all this division that we got going on here. Because the bottom line is, when that Second Amendment was written, whether the framers liked it or not, they wrote it for everybody. And I am everybody. And the law-abiding citizens of this city are everybody. And we want our rights, and we want to keep our rights. And by God, we're going to keep them.
This is the City Sites Podcast with Larry Kutzler.
Everything is being challenged today. We're pulling down statues and renaming lakes. We want to do away with the Electoral College, and we want the Second Amendment also to go away. Well, on the surface, we see these changes. They're reflecting a shift in thinking to eliminate our historical mistakes. It is true, history can have some ugly results, but you can't change history to reflect your attitude today. History is history, and we can learn from the mistakes of history, but we cannot change what happened in history. The Second Amendment that gives citizens the right to bear arms was officially a provision for the citizenry to protect themselves against rogue governments that wanted to force their will upon the people. It gave the people the right to fight back and not be victims of the powerful. Today, we probably see the Second Amendment as a provision of protection against crime and against bodily harm. I think much of what is happening in our political circles today is the struggle between freedom and tyranny. Freedom says that we can govern ourselves. It suggests and supports the idea that the government is for the people by the people. Those in government say we cannot govern ourselves because we don't have the capacity to do so. They know what is best for the rest of us, and their ideas are superior to ours. This alone puts me at odds with many of the politicians who are in our nation's capital. Common sense has been replaced by the ideology of an elite crowd whose end is to enslave people to a godless world of control. This spirit that drives the left today is not a God-honoring spirit. They are what the Bible calls the spirit of Antichrist. They support the taking of life through abortion, taking away the right to bear arms, distribution of personal wealth, and the borderless entry into this country. The extreme left wants America to become a socialist republic where the state educates our kids and determines our future through government control. I believe if you follow the philosophical trail of the left, you will discover there is a sinister agenda to destroy the America we have today. I don't think most Americans would like this system, but most are not taking the time to process the ramifications of what we are being told through our media. Today, I have Rick Norling with me to discuss and unpack the idea of losing our right to bear arms. Rick is the executive director of Operation High Ground, a nonprofit that works with the restoration of vets and their reentry into civilian life. Rick, I believe much of what we see in America today is a fight to maintain a foundation of what we have known as Americans. The freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, and the opposition to these ideals are people who want to fundamentally change America. First of all, Rick, how do you think the majority of veterans feel about the changes that are happening within our society today?
Thanks, Larry. That's a great question. And it's really a hard one to answer, to be in the middle and to answer something as a whole just because somebody is a veteran that they may think one way or the other. I can't answer it that way, but I can answer from experience of the number of people that I've talked to. And many of them feel that their oath of service is, I swear to uphold the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And in that, it encompasses the entire Constitution. So when they see people crumbling away at the Constitution, they've sworn an oath to uphold that. Well, that's troubling to a lot of them. Many of them that I've talked to have felt, and again, I have to qualify that, not as a whole, but a number of them that I've talked to have said that dealing with the Second Amendment, many of them feel that the law-abiding citizens who follow the laws of the United States and the many, many multiple laws, 30,000 of them, I believe, or in excess, laws that are in place to protect the rights of the non-gun owners. The gun owners feel that they're being pushed aside and they're being penalized because some people have done bad things. It's kind of like taking away or bringing back prohibition because there's alcoholics in the world. Some people abuse it, some people don't. It's a tough situation.
Well, we've seen this change, this shift in our country really happening relatively quick. It seems that the whole pattern of these extremists in government who call for gun control and open borders and these kinds of things, it seems like they get the press. And any other opposition to it or any other ideology that confronts that just doesn't get to be heard. And that bothers me also as an American. I ran across a video, Rick, the other day by a guy by the name of Cory Book. Cory is, I think, a salesperson or a spokesperson for Keeping America Tactical. It's a very interesting video, and I have the audio here that I want you to help me unpack. So I want you to listen to it, and we'll stop and start it as we go here and make comment, because I think our audience should be aware that this is common sense for every American, and it is the one missing piece in media today that we're not hearing. But when I first heard it, I said, yes, finally, somebody's saying it the way it should be said and the way I think is truth. So here's Cory Book.
For years, we have heard that 30 to 40,000 people die each year due to gun-related violence. This stat has become the scarlet letter of the U.S. And for years, we all just accepted this data point as the gospel to the story of America's gun problem. Opportunistic anti-gun politicians, organizations, and even our legacy media have used this data point to present an image that if you come to America, it's only a matter of time before you're shot and killed by a crazed gun-toting lunatic. As a result, this is why we need more common sense gun laws, i.e. gun control. But we have over 20,000 gun control laws in this country on a state and federal level.
Rick, I think that's fascinating. And that's something we don't hear about in the media at all, that there's 20,000 laws about gun control already on the books. So tell me, in all reality, what do you think those 20,000 laws are forgetting?
Again, that's another hard question to answer. I don't have the 20,000 laws in front of me, but from my experience is that if those were upheld, there wouldn't be a question and nobody would be questioning those in the first place. They are all put into law for a purpose. And again, most of the people that are complaining about gun control issues are certainly not looking at the laws, nor could they care about them. So obviously that those laws that are in place are not being, or let's just say virtually ignored from the point. So setting new laws when you're not looking at or having at least a discussion about the laws that are already in place is not prudent.
Well, you've bought a handgun before, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And did you have to go through some sort of clarification? You got to give your name, your social security number, and then there's a background check. And it usually took, I don't know, maybe half a day or an hour or whatever, but it was checked through a database on the federal level. And it said yes or no. This guy's a risk. No, he's not. Yes, he's a felon. No, he's not. I mean, I don't know. When you talk about better qualifications and more restrictions, where are you going to go beyond that?
Well, the database is in place, and I mean, it doesn't fall just into gun ownership. It falls into almost every aspect of our life, whether we're a commercial driver, whether we're driving a car, whether we're applying for a job in a classified position. Certainly there's an area where they can look at it and find the answer almost immediately. In the case of gun controls, the people that I know that have purchased guns before have gone through a very rigorous questionnaire research check. Most of them are 2 to 3 weeks before they get clarification and the approval to buy the handgun or the rifle or the hunting, the shotgun or whatever it may be that they're purchasing. Then they go into a database and they're held into that position. That also ties in, from my understanding, with the law enforcement, where they're checked, should there be any traffic violations, should there be any, say, alcohol abuse or something like that would all play a part in the person owning a handgun.
Or mental illness or something like that. Let's go back to Corey.
I think we're past common sense at this point and are well into infringement. Don't get me wrong, if 40,000 people every year were being murdered with guns, that is an issue. The question is, however, how big is the issue? And a better question is it a big enough issue to justify infringing on a constitutional right that protects people's ability to protect themselves? The UK is the shining example of gun control for anti-gunners. The UK has a population size of 60 million people. So let's say 40,000 people were murdered with a gun. That would only be 0.06% of the population. Now let's look at America, where there are over 300 million guns and a population size of 327 million people. 40,000 people out of 327 million are only 0.01% of the population. And that's if all of those shootings were murders, which they are not. If you break down the numbers, according to the type of gun deaths, the number of gun murders in this country becomes dizzyingly small. Of that 40,000, roughly 29,250 are suicides. 1,612 are law enforcement shootings in the line of duty. 274 are negligent discharge deaths. And 8,863 are actual murders by way of criminal activity, drug-related, or mentally ill people. So as far as actual gun murders, it's not 40,000, it's 8,863 out of 327 million people. Yes, suicides matter, but suicides aren't a gun problem. If they were, America with its over 300 million guns would lead the world in suicides, but we're not even in the top 20. Not to mention universal background checks don't stop suicides, assault weapon bans don't stop suicides, because people don't use AR-15s to shoot themselves. So as far as I'm concerned, using suicide numbers to push more gun control is dishonest as hell. As for law enforcement shootings, that's mostly cops killing criminals who were trying to kill them or someone else. And that's not just with guns. Call me crazy, but I have very little remorse for a criminal who dies trying to kill someone else.
Well, Rick, what I found interesting about Corey's statistics, because he went from 40,000 deaths by guns down to about legitimately 8,800 or so that were really probably qualified as people being shot by other people. I think that's amazing because that's disingenuous by the news media who starts out with that 40,000 because that isn't a realistic figure. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, as you know, I spend a lot of time in the area of suicide, and it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. It's the whole impetus of what we're trying to accomplish with Operation High Ground. Corey did make the comment about the United Kingdom or the UK, and that's an interesting statistic, but I'd also like to look further into the statistics of Australia, who also has a similar gun problem. He's talking about the numbers of violent crime opposed to the suicide, along with that number, 8,800. We've got 4 major cities with gun control laws that are second to none. And those are the ones, from my understanding, like Chicago, that hold the largest number of murders that actually fall into it. What Corey didn't mention in there is that the majority of those criminal activity murders are typically, like you said, in a drug deal or some type of criminal activity. And typically, it's not a random victim. It's somebody that knows each other.
It's a gang activity, usually. Yeah. And now I know that some gang activities do shoot innocent people, but it's really the gang activity, it's a gang war.
It does happen. We're talking on a national level, but we also have to let's look at something just with Minneapolis. Just recently, the chief of police has requested to the mayor that he's requesting an additional 400 police officers. Well, that was turned down to the point where they gave him 14.
And that may not even happen.
And those 14 officers were not going into the public arena where they're actually there to protect people. They need 400 people to let people know that the police awareness is there, but also to protect people. People need an opportunity to protect themselves, and those who carry a gun or have one in their home to protect themselves or their family shouldn't be overlooked. And I think to your earlier question, I think that's a lot of the veterans, they feel that same way.
When it comes to negligent discharges, guns aren't the problem either. People who are uneducated about guns that have guns are the problem. The lack of firearm knowledge in this country compared to the number of guns in this country is atrocious. And that's because we spend more time demonizing the various organizations we have that provide gun safety and education programs than using these organizations to teach the masses about firearm safety. I think it's safe to say, in a country with more guns than people, that we should spend more time trying to educate the population about guns instead of using BS stats to scare people away from them. At worst, education alone will cut the number of negligent discharges in half. At best, it'll reduce it nearly to nothing. Now, as far as the 8,863 actual murders, on average, 25% of all gun murders in America take place in 4 cities: Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, and Washington, D.C. Now, ask yourself this question. From a socioeconomic standpoint, what do all of these cities have in common? You guessed it. Each of these cities have well-known areas where the vast majority of their violence is concentrated in poverty-stricken, underdeveloped neighborhoods who have had the same leadership and power for decades that refuse to do anything to address the socioeconomic issues in these places. And no, it's not just a black culture thing. I know a ton of black families who live in the suburbs, and their kids aren't doing drive-bys in their BMWs. It's prolonged exposure to poverty that facilitates the violence in these neighborhoods. And even then, it's a small group of people committing the majority of the violence in these neighborhoods. If the leaders of these areas really wanted to stop the violence, instead of ignoring it on non-election years, only to exploit it for votes during election years, they would, and they can. But they gain and maintain more control in treating the symptom than they do providing the cure, so they don't.
Fascinating, because these are the cities that have the strictest gun restrictions on gun control that America has, and yet it has not curbed the murder rate. You have some statistics there from the city of Chicago, right?
Yeah, in 2018, there were 530 murders in the city of Chicago alone.
I mean, that's a war zone.
It is a war zone.
And yet, if you had 500, that many people dying on the streets of any city, why wouldn't you have the federal government come in and have martial law? It seems to be serious enough to merit it.
Well, and there's another interesting point to that also, is that guns are outlawed in Chicago.
Yeah, right. So where'd these guys get all the guns?
They're going to find a way to get guns. It's a culture that we're dealing with. Guns are not necessarily that's just a tool to carry out the extreme anger and the frustration. Certainly there would be, in the early days in, let's say, New York, when we were talking like West Side Story in that time, certainly there was a knife, certainly there was a club, certainly there was something else. Cain killed Abel with a rock. So, I mean, there's going to be something, and it all deals back to a level of anger and frustration for whatever reason. Corey had mentioned socioeconomic issues. That's also a really big area, and that certainly does break down. The family is gone completely, and there's nobody really teaching people, and it really does seem to fall back into the Christian perspective, the nucleus of the family.
Well, I think that there's a lot of anger in our country. It's unresolved anger that's probably generations long, and in some of these communities it boils over. And that's why they have gangs, and the gangs shoot each other or they rob other people. It's just the anger. It's not the gun. Deal with the anger and the frustration of the emotion, not the gun. The gun is not necessarily has to be controlled. The anger does. And deal with that. I think you'd find that gun violence would go down. Let's return to Corey.
We could literally cut that 8,863 gun murders down to 6,648 just by putting our energy towards fixing the socioeconomic conditions in the inner city. And if we're feeling really ambitious, how about we also take that energy and focus on the mental health and figure out why we have the mass shootings that we do? Granted, mass shootings account for less than a statistical 0 when it comes to gun deaths. But it would do us some good to address the mental health issue in this country. And guess what else would go down as a result? You guessed it, suicides. Long story short, America does not have a gun violence problem. We have a suicide problem and a socioeconomic problem in our inner cities. Yes, we have gun violence, but compared to the multitude of things that are far more likely to kill us, why are we expending so much energy on destroying the Second Amendment when it's a fact that guns are used to kill less than 1% of the population? Gun control is a solution to a problem that doesn't exist and a weapon for people who want control. I know some of you are thinking, well, if you have such a small chance of being shot and killed, why do you need a gun for protection? That answer is easy. The chance of me using my gun in self-defense may be less than 1%, but if I become that percent, I can lose 100% of everything. Right now, there's a culture war against the Second Amendment, which is why I need your help spreading our message to counter their message. You can do this by leaving a comment, sharing this video, and click the bell and subscribe button. Let my voice be your voice, and let them know you want to keep America tactical, because the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive.
Well, I appreciated, Rick, the audio we've been listening to by Corey Book from Keep America Tactical, because it's a side of the issue we don't hear. We hear about how bad gun control is, and there's politicians running for every office under the sun that say we need more gun control. I don't believe that that's the case. I think that we can always be a little bit more conscientious about guns, but guns are not the problem. Guns are only an instrument that's used to live out and facilitate anger.
You know, a couple of things that you mentioned there, and political reasons, once the reasons get politicized, they certainly seem to go to the extreme to touch people on their emotional levels. Political reasons for causing a law, no matter what the case, no matter what the cause, tends to be over-exaggerated and overemphasized. And many times the political reasons are underlying reasons for an agenda that somebody wants to accomplish. Not necessarily the real big cause, but an important part when you mention the mental health issues of what we're dealing with is that, yes, indeed, suicide in dealing with, which what I have dealt with over the years, not personally, but through a number of people that I work with, is that it does fall into a mental health situation where it becomes a mindset where you believe certain things that may or may not be true, whether it be from a health reason, whether it be from an emotional reason, whether it be from an inside source or an outside source, and it causes you to feel that there's no hope. And in many cases, they're using that and they're bulking this loss by weapon, it happens to be. If there wasn't a gun, those people that want to commit suicide are going to hang themselves in their cell with a belt, which we hear over and over and over again. That's why people in prison are often put on suicide watch, just to make sure that that doesn't happen. They are not committing suicide with a gun. They're finding other ways to do it because they're very creative if that's the goal that they're trying to accomplish.
Well, Rick, I have always felt that the problem here is our God absence. We are missing the whole God consciousness in this country. And as a result, I think God has pulled back and has allowed us to suffer at the hands of our own illnesses and our own dementia and our own desires, sinful desires. And I think that's what Romans 1 is all about, where he turns us over to our own sin. And I think that's what we're experiencing. So, yes, I know people say, well, it's not just a spiritual, but I do think it's a spiritual issue. And if we were to bring God back into society, back into the lives, to deal with the anger and the frustration that we see in many of our communities, I think there would be peace, and there would be a sense of which that we entrust our lives and our conditions of our lives over to God. I think there is a sense of peace with that, and we wouldn't have to take matters into our own hands and allow anger to take its natural path, which is to destroy others.
Well, Larry, to confirm that statement, a while ago we did an interview with Phil Wright when he was in town here, and one of the things he pointed out, I think it bears repeating.
And Phil Wright is a chaplain in the Army.
He's a retired chaplain from the Army. He was a former Army Ranger. And one of the things that he found is he pointed out that there's over 2,200 programs within the government dealing with suicide, and it's failing miserably. And the New York Times wrote an article where they were quoted as saying that the government is failing miserably with their 2,200 programs for suicide, to the point where it's raising, again, in active duty military from 2017 to 2018, it's up 25% among active duty military. But what he did find in there, and what the article through the New York Times quoted, was that faith-based programs are 100% effective in dealing with post-traumatic issues and suicide. Again, it's a good example of the bureaucracy of people who don't understand certain programs, bringing them to a law where they don't understand the makeup of the law and being able to put it together, which brings us back to the faith-based programs, and the absence of God is causing a lot of these issues.
You said, quote, Americans who own AR-15s and AK-47s will have to sell them to the government, all of them. You know the critics call this confiscation. Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work?
I am. If it's a weapon that was designed to kill people on a battlefield, if the high-impact, high-velocity round, when it hits your body, shreds everything inside of your body because it was designed to do that so that you would bleed to death on a battlefield and not be able to get up and kill one of our soldiers. When we see that being used against children, and in Odessa, I met the mother of a 15-year-old girl who was shot by an AR-15, and that mother watched her bleed to death over the course of an hour because so many other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland. There weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
In recent years, culture has become more influential than the church. Much of the influence is a direct attack on the Bible and the truth. City Sites Podcast is designed to bring a different point of view, and we hope you will continue to listen as we make our case. Thank you for joining us today. Every Friday, we bring you this podcast with interviews with people who are challenging the status quo of Christianity and challenging the cultural norms of our day. Please help us get the word out by sharing the link to this podcast with your online friends and family. Our website also contains other podcasters who are part of the City Sites network of communicators, all sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. Our website is citysitesurbanmedia.com.
This is the City Sites Podcast Network.